Hello, I'm Father Jim. Welcome to Mass in Boomtown, a series of talks about Catholic worship for roughnecks, roustabouts, and other residents of Hutchinson County, Texas. I'm glad you're here. Did you know that there's a famous painting called Boomtown? I have a picture of it here on the monitor of my laptop. Boomtown was painted by a well-known American artist named Thomas Hart Bentley. It was painted in the 1920s, at the time when abstract art was becoming very popular. But Benton wasn't much impressed with abstract paintings. Rather, he traveled to the heartland of America, and he painted scenes of hardworking people in fields and factories and small towns. He wanted these people to recognize the importance of their work in the life of their community and their nation. Did you know that this famous painting called Boomtown was actually painted here in Borger, Texas? I bring this up because I feel very strongly about the fact that the places where we live and the history of the places where we live influence the way we see the world. They frame the way we see the world around us. But they also play an influence in how we see God. Specifically, how we see God at work in the world in which we live, the places we work, the communities we call home. So in this series on the Mass, I'm going to use ordinary things from our ordinary lives to help us appreciate the history and the structure and the theology and the significance of the Holy Sacrifice of the Mass. So let's get started. And let's start by suiting up. Let's start by looking at the gear that is worn during the celebration of the Mass. I'm talking about the vestments. And let's do so not in an abstract way, but in a way that Benton would be proud of, in a way that will help us directly connect the worship of our church with the work of our hands, the work that you and I do in this community day after day. And you know that a lot of the people in this region are employed in the oil industry. So if you or somebody you know works at Phillips or the carbon black plant or Agrium, you know that one of the first things that someone puts on when they arrive on the job site is a hard hat. And chances are that the hard hat will have a face shield. And if no face shield, at least there will be a need for safety glasses and probably earplugs as well. That's because the work is dangerous and precautions need to be taken. Well, guess what? The same goes for the priest. In a slightly different way. Let me explain. The first vestment when a priest suits up for Mass is called an amice. Now, like a face shield, the amice is optional. But listen to the prayer that is said if and when an amice is employed. It goes like this. Place, O Lord, the helmet of salvation upon my head to repel the assaults of the devil. In other words, the amice is supposed to remind the priest of a helmet. The amice is similar to the cloth worn by Roman soldiers underneath their helmets to collect sweat. In other words, the celebration of the Mass for us here at Hutchinson County, for folks who work in the refineries or know a lot of people who do, the Mass isn't a family picnic at Lake Meredith. In spiritual terms, the Mass is a matter of life and death. Literally. This fact is reinforced by the second vestment called an alb, the long white robe that reaches from the shoulders down to the floor. Now, this is not strictly speaking a priestly garment. It's a symbol of the baptismal garment that every Christian is given on the day that their life is joined to Christ in his body, the church. At each and every baptism, after the naked soul is cleansed from the corrosive power of sin, the new Christian is given a symbolic garment with these words. See in this white garment the outward sign of your Christian dignity. But those of us living in an oil town have an advantage in recognizing that this white garment that symbolizes our faith is also a protective garment, like the hazmat or the slicker suits worn inside the refineries that protect the worker from corrosive liquid that can burn the skin like acid. Never forget the life-saving dimension of your baptism, and whose blood it was who made those garments white in the first place. We read in the book of Revelation, "Who are these, clothed in white robes?" asked the apostle in his vision of the end of time. And in that vision, the angel turns to him and answers, "These are those who survived the great tribulation. They have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb." Again, the alb is a symbol that our faith is not just a family celebration, it's a lot more. It's a matter of life and death. Immortal life, the life of our soul. Let's move on to another piece of liturgical gear alluded to in the book of Revelation. John says, "Then I turned, and I saw 7 golden lampstands. And in the midst of the lampstand, one like a son of man, clothed in a long robe, with a golden sash across his chest." The sash is reflective of the stole worn by priests and deacons. I happen to have one here. These stoles, like the stripes on a soldier's uniform, signify authority in the level of rank. The stoles that the priest wear drape over the shoulder, for the deacon that go crossways across the heart. Well, for those of us who live in an oil town, these stoles are more than simply symbols of authority and rank. For us in an oil town, this symbolism can go even deeper. Think of it. The people you know in our community who climb the cooling towers on all of those refineries, checking welds, replacing insulation, those workers rely on safety harnesses that they hook to a ladder or to pipes to keep them from falling to their death due to a misstep. Well, so too, the stoles worn by our pastors and the leaders in our faith anchor us to what is solid, like a safety harness. They anchor us to what is solid, which is nothing less than the Word of God and the teaching of His church. Now, moving on to the next vestment. But before we move on to the next vestment, let's go back for just a minute to that last verse from the book of Revelation, because it also mentions lampstands. Again, for folks in other communities, those gold lampstands sound a lot like church. But for us, in an oil town, the candles inside our church are there to remind us that the light of our faith extends beyond our church and into the places where we work. Think back to those safety helmets. More often than not, they come with H2S monitors attached. Those monitors beep and they blink a bright light to alert the worker to a dangerous level of hydrogen sulfide in the air. And so we have these vestments that connect us to that which is solid, connect us to a history of battle, resilience, and courage, connect us to light that dispels darkness and danger. And this is all even before Mass even begins. Well, the last piece of gear that I want to mention is the chasuble, the large garment that's worn over the top of all these other vestments. The color of this vestment changes according to the season: purple for Advent and Lent, white for Christmas and Easter, green for ordinary time, red for Pentecost, and for the feast of saints who shed their blood for Christ. The colors of the chasuble change, but like the fire-retardant gear of somebody who works inside those refineries, the commitment to the example of Christ, the commitment to be willing to lay down our lives for others as He did, that never changes. That's to cover us like that chasuble, forever weighing on us, demanding that we protect ourselves and protect those around us. Before we wrap up this introductory presentation on the Mass in Boomtown, I want to say just a few words about the altar. In a Catholic church, the altar is always at the center, and it is the place where we center our attention when we come to church. At the beginning and at the end of Mass, The altar is reverenced with a kiss because it is a symbol of Christ, the center of our life. Well, again, if you happen to work in the oil industry, you are familiar with the term FIC. It stands for Field Information Center. You also know the term EOC, which stands for Emergency Operations Center. So the next time you see the priest and deacon bow to the altar, think of how chaotic life would be without an FIC. Or better yet, think about the last time the sound of alarms and sirens filled the air and you rushed to the Emergency Operations Center and thank God that you had a competent incident commander in charge. Well, that's what it's like. And that's what it means when we gather each Sunday around the altar. The altar is our Emergency Operations Center, and our commander is Christ. Here in Hutchinson County, the place where we live helps us recognize the fact that the sacrifice of the Mass is more than a family picnic with tortillas or tamales or brisket or barbecue. Rather, the sacrifice of the Mass is about life and death and staying safe in a world where spiritual danger is never far away. Thank you for joining me. I'm Father Jim.